pass in Scott index view model. And I may need to include the full namespace. Yeah, see how it doesn't like it? I'll put the full namespace. Typically, you put that in its own namespace, like view models or something like that. Okay. So then, instead of doing it like this, so I say at, and that kind of, this is called razor that we're in right here. This is HTML. As soon as I say at, I can do C sharp. Yeah.
Oh, so it's indicating that C sharp is about to happen?
Right. And the larger the whole page is called a razor page. It is a mix of HTML and C sharp. Exactly. So now I say model dot name. See? I got IntelliSense. That means that this would break if I misspelled something. The compiler would notice. If I said dot foo or whatever,
or did ages.
that's gonna fit. Yeah, ages. That's a good point. See, it actually squiggled.
So it does not contain this definition.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So yes, age or ages, spelling errors would show up there. So that's why that's better than putting things in a bag. But sometimes you want to do a little of both. You might pass the object and then a little bit of extra information, like an error message.
And that's something that is appropriate to put in a bag?
Totally appropriate, because think about this. Here's my page now, looking awesome.
Yeah, everything's looking awesome.
It worked just as it should, and including my age, which is great.
Yeah, you know, I didn't know you were younger than me.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, wow.
It's very young, very young. Fresh. If there were an optional error message, maybe that would be in the view data, and it would be like, you know, error message.
So could you put, let's say if someone's misspelled something, not misspelled it, let's say they've misputting in information.
Right, so we'll do some form validation.
Would that be an appropriate thing to put in the data?
Exactly, so the data would come across in the view, in the model, but then some localized error message or something that the server noticed that, oh, this age is too young, or you're 150 years old, or whatever, could then come in kind of on a sidecar. So you've got your main view model and then extra stuff in the bag.
So if you fill in the form and said age 29, it would be like you're lying?
Yeah, you could do that if you wanted to.
Okay.
It's good. Cool. So in this case here, let's just make it all together. Get the model from the database or wherever. Totally up to the person. We'll look at another application in a little bit with a little more sophistication. Do some stuff, and then pass it on to the next location. All right? So if we go back to our
diagram?
Before we go to the diagram, I want to show you this. This is the patterns wiki from Ward Cunningham.
So who's Ward Cunningham?
Ward Cunningham invented the wiki.
Okay.
Not Wikipedia, but the concept of the wiki.
Okay, just having like
He made it up. So automatic linking of Pascal-cased files, all this stuff. And he's got this great patterns repository, the Portland Patterns Repository, where he talks about MVC. And he says, the easy way is to understand is the model is the data, and the view is on the screen, and the controller is the glue. And that's really, really good. And check this out, though. He says, smart models, thin controllers, and dumb views. You don't want to have logic
in your view.
In your view.
Okay.
It's not its job. Its job is to show stuff.
It's just display stuff to us.
So you want to avoid putting too much validation in your view. You don't want to call the database from your view. Your view takes fairly dumb models or fairly dumb view models and then shows them.
Okay.
All right. Cool. So that is a trite but still pretty decent example of how this works, and it follows this diagram. But you made a better diagram.
I did make a better diagram.
So in this diagram here, we see how the browser or the user talks to the controller, does something with the model, updates the view. In reality, it's a little bit more like this.
It's a little bit more like this. So technically, from what I've understood from this experience so far, is that I go into a browser and I know where I'm going. So I go to HTTP MVC. And what actually happens is that there's some sort of mapping to a route.
Right, the routing table, exactly. And in this case, in the case of MVC, it's the routing middleware.
Which we don't really see anymore.
It's been hidden because MVC makes it convenient.
It makes it convenient.
Yeah.
But we saw how it came together during our routing section.
Exactly. Okay?
Then from the routing, that's when the controller steps in.
You're right. Somebody, the magic
In the
system,
way.
makes it news up, or it creates a controller, and it calls an action on that controller. And then that would be like, foo or whatever action gets called. That is going to then
Send it over to the model, which
make a model, go to the database, whatever.
okay, and then then it goes right back.
Because I might go to the database. Like if we go and look at it like this, it could be check user input, go to database, check data, pass to view. It's kind of like when we say do stuff,
This is the stuff it's doing.
it's coordinating. It's the controller, right? It's trying to bring that whole system together. So routes come in. Controller is the brain.
The brain of the...
Data could be database, could be web server, another web server, could be whatever. And then sends the model back to the view.
Okay, and then we see it.
Exactly.
So it sounds like a lot of stuff that just happens in an instant.
It does happen in an instant. It actually happens in milliseconds. There's all sorts of other things you can do, more advanced techniques for caching and stuff. But if we go and do this and just run it, let's actually look at the results. If we run this
We
can do it two ways. That's a good point. We can do it in Kestrel. But if I hit debug, we get this thing called diagnostics tools,
Oh.
which is pretty cool. So this here sees all the different events in the memory that gets used. So I'm sitting here going refresh, 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 and seeing that the memory and CPU usage is very flat. If I ran it under Kestrel, we would see some of the logging. We can also see the logging down here in output. So that logging appears, right there, and you can see the files that get loaded. But I like to see the command prompt sometimes, because then remember the relationship between 5,000 and 8081? We decided to switch it over to 5,000.
And then we forgot to switch it back.
But I remember now, because I've learned it. Right, so as I go, look, finished in 50 milliseconds.
Wow.
Yeah, minimal amount of work happening here. 30 milliseconds, whatever.
So what did people do before all this?
Well, so if you're using like early versions of PHP or early versions of classic ASP, the model, the view, and the controller were all in one file.
Whoa.
Right? You index.asp.
Okay.
And, it was okay, and it worked fine, and we got lots of great work done, except when apps get complicated, you're going to wish that things were nice and separated and clean.
And that's how MVC came. Okay.
So that's the intro to the intro of MVC. But we haven't yet done any forms.
How do we get that data?
Right. User data, some validation of that data, maybe a little bit of database stuff.
Today?
Just a smidge.
We'll see.
All right, we'll be right back.
So Scott, we have been introduced to MVC, but what we basically did was learn the guts of what makes MVC.
Yep.
So the next step would logically be kind of building our very first application. So when I think of building a web application, I think of some sort of form, of taking in some sort of information and displaying it back to me.
Some kind of CRUD.
Yes.
Create, read, update, delete.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll try to do something basic like that, because so far we started kind of at a basic Hello World app, which would be a .NET Core app.
Yep.
Learned a little bit about how .NET Core fit together. Then we used ASP.NET Core at the low level to say Hello World. We layered on top of that middleware and routing, talked about Kestrel and IIS, then eventually saw MVC, but we had built all that up from one tiny basic app.
Yeah.
We should just start from this default template.
So we did all that, and now we're starting throwing it all away.
This is how computers work, though, right? Because each additional layer of abstraction is indistinguishable from magic.
All right, so let's go and see how we can do this.
Okay, so we'll be in Visual Studio Community. Again, we're doing everything in this MVA with free versions.
Yep.
So .NET is free and open source, Visual Studio Code is free and open source, and Visual Studio Community, go to visualstudio.com/free, also free.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to say new project, and I'm going to say ASP.NET Core Web Application.
All right.
Hit OK. Before, you had me make an empty one.
Yes, I did.
I'm going to go a little farther and I'll make a web application. And I'm going to have this web application have some authentication. This means that individual users could have accounts.
So we could add things to this, like?
Well, not just that. It's not just adding stuff to a database, but it's actually individual people could log in. So when we authenticate, is it an anonymous database? Is it an anonymous website where anyone can log in? Or is it people who can log in with their work account or Azure account or their Windows account? We're going to make it so you could potentially log into this as Scott or as Maria.
Okay, so you could add things like Facebook and Twitter and Google.
Yeah, we could extend that and absolutely have other providers, totally. Okay, hit OK. All right, so by default, we're going to get this nice welcome here, and within this, you've got how-tos that you can go and follow along. So a lot of the things that we're using to talk today, you have available to you. You can go and explore these things. This is just a project README. It's an HTML file that's sitting in the root of the application. So if you want to get that back, that's sitting right there. And you see the packages are restoring. See?
So that's the .NET Restore?
Yep, .NET Restore is running. This one had a little bit more stuff.
That's a lot of stuff.
Well, because it's got all that MVC stuff that we would need, and they've preset up some basics. So this is really kind of cool, actually.
Oh, that's really cool. So what are some of these basics in here?
Well, let's run it and see what it looks like, and then we'll talk about those. So I'm going to hit Control F5. I like to hit Control F5 rather than hitting the debug button, because if I'm not debugging, it's a little bit faster to start up.
That's something I'm trying to get into, but I usually just hit play.
Yeah, it does. It's a little bit faster if you do it this way.
Well, that's actually the nicest looking thing we've looked at this.
This is, given that we've been just saying, hello, hey, what's up, how's it going? Yeah, this is actually quite a bit nicer. This is using Bootstrap.
So it's using a Bootstrap template, so I can go add Bootstrap stuff to this.
Right, so Bootstrap is CSS and JavaScript from Twitter that makes for nice looking and what they call responsive design. So if I went like this, it's a little mobile site as well.
That's neat.
Okay, so that comes out of the box, and then we've got this kind of, what do you call this, a carousel.
Yeah, it's a carousel.
The hero at the top there. And then I can click register, and we could go and make new accounts. That was the individual user account registration.
So that's what just happened. Okay.
Yep. This was all kind of created for us. Let's take a look at startup.cs.
That's a pretty chunky one.
It's got a lot going on there, so let's just explore for a minute. So remember last time when we had app-settings.json, here we've got some additional options like reload on change. That means you could actually change your config.
Oh, okay.
It'll get noticed.
And they'll just reload?
And you don't have to go and reload your application. We will reload the configuration for you.
So what's the next one telling us?
So this is kind of a combination. Remember that we spent time looking at environment names.
Yeah.
And then after that looked at configuration. This is saying that look here for application settings, and then when you're done looking here, look for additional application settings here. So it would be app settings dot production dot JSON.
Okay.
So you could have environment-specific app settings. Cool, eh?
That's pretty cool.
There's some configuration stuff, like where are you going to get the SQL database connections. We're getting that from configuration. Then we've got add services. We'll talk more about dependency injection tomorrow, but suffice it to say, this application can send email and texts.
So this is dependent, but what I'm looking at right now is dependency.
Right. This is the setting up of services. We're basically letting the system know that there will be a way to send email, there'll be a way to send text messages. It's handled in this class. And, you know, hey, if anybody goes looking for an iEmail sender, that's
where it is.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. Okay. Now down here.
So down here I see a couple of new things, 2 new things actually. So we have the app database error page.
Yep, that's new. So the developer exception page and then extended with database information.
Okay.
Thing called browser link, which is a debugging tool that we'll use a little bit later. And then if you're not in development, remember before we were just getting 404s and 500s and stuff? You can actually say, I want this page to handle my errors for me.
That's
so
nice.
If the 500 happens in production, give them a friendly error.
Oh, something nice like,
right.
sorry,
and
check back soon.
Maybe log it. And then there's that default route right there.
There it is.
And then use static files, and then use identity. That's the middleware for the authentication of the user's name, Scott or Maria or whoever. Okay. And then you see here it says add external authentication below. So if someone wanted to go and do Twitter or Facebook.
You could do it this way.
You could do it that way.
Okay, cool.
Okay. But if we look at the Solution Explorer, we've got our CSS and JavaScript in www root. So this is your Bootstrap and your site CSS. We've got a couple of controllers. We'll go looking at those in a little bit. Data, you'll have a whole section on Entity Framework and how data works soon.
Okay.
A couple of models for managing users' accounts. This is a nice sample to explore. It's a little complicated, but it's pretty cool. The thing that sends messages, all right, email and SMS.
So are these different services?
Exactly. These services here are services to provide the ability to send email or send SMSs or text messages.
So I could add Twilio in here and SendGrid and all those sweet things.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Like I think, in fact, plug in your SMS service here to send a text message. That's where your Twilio goes in there, or whatever you decide to use for sending your text messages. And then we've got all the views to manage accounts. You see there's a lot there.
Yeah.
Log in, log out, forgot my password. You know, life's complicated. And then verify phone numbers for 2-factor auth. Pretty cool and pretty sophisticated.
And this is all already wired up for you.
Already wired up. So your basic application already does quite a bit. But what we're going to do is we're going to add a new model, because we'll make a list of, we'll say movies. Okay? So I'm going to right-click here and add a class. Okay, and we will add a movie class. And notice that it's in the models namespace because it happened to be where I right-clicked.
So it automatically detected that.
Because I right-clicked on models, it assumed that that's what I wanted my namespace to be. If I'd clicked controllers, it would have been
controllers. Okay.
Okay, so let's go and say that movies have an ID. And they have a title.
That's some sort of genre.
Yeah, and they have a release date. Genre. And let's say that they have a price. That looks like movies. That looks like a movie right there. That's just the description of what a movie is. Right?
Yeah, that seems fair enough.
Okay.
We're missing a rating, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Could add ratings, then I'd need an enumeration and it would get more complicated, but you're right. Now, because I'm going to put this in the database, that ID is kind of unique. It's going to be some number that's going to be unique to the movies. It's different from the title, because there's like 2 Ghostbusters movies. They're going to have different IDs. Okay? And let's go and do a build to make sure I haven't broken anything yet. It is certainly possible. What we don't have is any kind of movie controller.
So it has to match up.
It would be nice if it matched up. I don't necessarily have to have it match up, but I know that movies are going to need their own section of the website. So I'm going to say add controller. And see how this appears here?
Yeah.
This is a scaffolding system. This is kind of cool. This will look at the movies object and then generate a controller for it and a whole series of views.
Oh, okay.
Remember we said we wanted CRUD.
Yeah. So, it needs one to create.
Create, read, update, delete, and it will generate them all. So what I'm going to do is I could say MVC controller with create, read, update, delete.
Oh, okay. So you can. This is all part of the scaffolding process.
It's all part of scaffolding. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try this one that says MVC controller with views using the entity framework. This one says make actions for create and et cetera, et cetera. This one says make actions for create using the entity framework database system. This is the ORM, or the object relational mapper.
Okay.
All right. So let's double click on that. And we're going to get this folder here. Okay. So here we're going to pick our movie. That's our model. And we'll pick our application's database context. That's the thing it's been using to talk to databases.
Okay.
We're going to say generate views and whatever scripts that are necessary, and we'll call it the movies controller. Now if I had a layout page that would be like, remember that larger layout frame that had like my header and my footer?
Yeah.
I could use that.
That as well? Okay.
But I'm not going to use that in this case.
So when you hit this right now, will it generate all the views for you?
It will generate at least 4 or 5 views, and it will generate the controller.
Okay.
So we should actually see it happen on the right-hand side when we hit add.
So let's pay attention.
Cross our fingers and see what happens. So it's movies controller just showed up.
And then let's look in the views.
Oops. So movies just showed up. Movies controller just showed up. Create, delete, details, edit, and index just showed up.
Okay.
So I think we're going to need to explore those. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work quite yet, but it does mean that we got a little bit of getting started code.
Yeah, something that we don't have to write from the ground up.
And this is the thing. We could have written that ourselves. No fun. All right, let's see what we got here. So knowing what we know about the now legendary Scott controller and Maria controller.
Yes.
What do we have? We've got a movies controller. So what's the URL going to be if we use the default route?
For the movies controller? Isn't it going to be movies?
Yep, /movies. And that means that index would be the default.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. We've got this database context that's being automatically created or newed up. It's being made for us with dependency injection.
Okay, so that's another example of dependency injection.
Yep, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But the point is that we notice that nowhere do we say new DB context. It's happened for us. It's a service.
Okay, it's one of the services. So we have the underscore context equals context. What does that mean?
That's an interesting one. So here is a private property. And one of the conventions that people sometimes use is they'll put an underscore in front of the variable name to say it's private.
Okay, so that's just an way of indicating that this is private.
Everyone's different. It's not required. You could actually say context equals context, but it can be a little confusing. Sometimes people might say like an abbreviation and they'll call it like, context in. But the point is that the context that was passed in, we have a moment in time that we can save it.
Okay.
We're going to grab that. All right. This is kind of convenient to put your URLs at the top there, just to get a general idea of like, what exactly does this do? Oh yeah, it is a get for /movies. Okay. And this is going to go and return a view, but notice that this context, that's the database context, is going to say, go and get the movies and put them into a list.
So we'll just list out all the movies that we have available.
Now, this could have been written in the old days for people who are maybe a little bit familiar with ASP.NET. You might have seen something like this. So a couple things here. I'm doing it on 2 lines. I'm saying, go to the database, grab the movies, turn them into a list, That'll be in here, and then pass that list off to the view. But a few things have changed. First, of course, it's on one line, just because we like things tidy. But we're saying we want to do this asynchronously, and all that means is if it's going to take a long time to talk to the database, just tell us when you're done, database. Yeah. We're going to go over here and keep working. Oh, you're done? Now we're ready for you. Okay. Basically, we're going to try to be as non-blocking as possible.
Okay.
All right? So we go and we get that movie, and then that gets returned. The movie list goes to the index view. So let's go back to our friend. Where'd she go? MVC. If you wouldn't mind cutting out the news bit.
I'll cut it out.
We turned it off on the browser and said don't show the news, and it's still showing the news.
Hold on 1 second. Let me put something in there to make sure I catch that.
Just don't have like Jim Carrey in there somewhere.
You can start when you're ready.
So if we go back to our friend here, think about this in the context of movies.
Okay.
All right. So she goes and she hits /movies. The movies controller gets created. It goes to the database. It's called a database context. We'll learn about that. And it gets a list of movies. List of movie. That list of movies gets passed into the view. In this case, I think it was called the index view.
Okay, and then
HTML gets made.
And that is presented to her.
That is the response that comes back to the web browser. So let's take a moment then and look at movies index. It's a table row. We've got the display names for genre, price, release, etc. And then that's really all it is. Look at that.
That's it.
For each item in model. And what is model? Let's zoom in on that. It is an enumerable list of movies. Enumerable means you can go forward over it one time.
Okay.
You don't get to seek around, go forward and backwards. You can enumerate it once. It's not a formal list. And that's set right there. Remember before when we said model, passed in a Scott view model or whatever? Here we're passing in a list of movies. And then for each of those movies, at the very end, we have edit, details, and delete that are going to appear. And this is actually called a tag helper, and we're going to do a separate section on that. But suffice it to say, these are links to go and edit, check the details, or delete an individual movie. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. Let's break some stuff.
All right, so let's go and see what it looks like.
Oh,
it's not going to work?
There's no chance it'll work.
Never know.
It could work.
Probably
There's always something small, but it's fun. It's better that it not work, because then we will learn something. Thinking? All right, let's look at this.
So
it says, cannot open the database requested by the login. It says that there's no database here. So it doesn't have this concept of a movie, right? And I can, try to ask it to do that, but probably not going to work. Let's check it out. Entity Framework, when we get into the more detailed stuff, lets you take that description of movies, and it says, oh, a movie has an ID and a genre and a date and all those things. That's going to be a table in the database with these columns.
So Entity Framework allows you to do that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So what it's doing here, has it scaffold that for us?
It's going to scaffold what's called a migration, and we're going to go and stop IIS Express, and we only have to do this one time to unload our application. All right, and we're going to go into this folder here. So I'm just going to take the path that we're in here, and I'm going to go to the command prompt, cd, and then paste that in. There's our application, all right? And we are going to say .NET.